There's the old joke about the guy in the flood, and the flood waters are rising around his home, and a boat comes by and says, jump in the boat, and we'll save you. And the gentleman says, oh, I appreciate that, but my faith is in the Lord. Later, as the flood waters are up to the roof and about to overtake the gentleman, a helicopter flies over, and they let down a tether. They say, grab a hold of the tether, and we'll save you. The guy says, oh, I appreciate that, but my faith is in the Lord. After the guy gets to heaven, he asks God, well, what happened? Like, why didn't you save me? And God says, well, I sent the boat and the helicopter. Welcome to Conservative Coffee Hour. I'm Stanley Smith. Uh, Actually, recently we had an interesting question from one of our participants. I think it was this last week or maybe the week before. I think it was Art Ellington asked, what is it? What is it that we're trying to conserve here? And that was a very good question. It is a very good question. And after giving it a little thought, I thought, well, the answer to that is social cohesion. We're trying to conserve the idea of social cohesion, the idea that we had a moral, social, and cultural bond in this country, which united us as a people. And I think in our time, we can see a steady erosion of social cohesion, which really has not been to our benefit. It's probably been to the benefit of political operatives and the government. Recently, we had the midterm elections, and the phenomenon of the red wave. And since then, we've had these narratives coming out about how it really wasn't a matter of election fraud or bad messaging. It was the fact that Republicans just didn't turn out. We just didn't show up and bother to vote. And I'm not sure if I'm completely buying that as a narrative because articles and news reports have said that in 2020 there were record numbers of Republican voters, and again in 2022 they gained, I believe it was 6 million additional Republican voters. So more Republican voters than ever. And I would guess I would consider is this whole idea that we were all just sitting in our hands and not voting, is that a false narrative or a cover story for the idea that in fact it really was a message problem. We have one of the worst economies and national security issues, and in general, people are more dissatisfied with government than ever. Um, After the election, someone came into my office and said, we didn't do so well in this last election because Republican voters, just didn't get out there. He said the only people who voted were evangelicals and holy rollers. And I did tell him at the time, I said, Richard, that I believe that's a false narrative. And he said, no, it's true. He said, only the evangelicals and holy rollers voted. He said, that's why I voted, because I'm a holy roller. I, I told him as kindly as I could that he was most definitely not a holy roller. And he said, yes, yes, I am. And I said, no, I'm afraid you're not. And he said, well, what is a holy roller? And I said, well, a holy roller is someone who believes that God is sovereign over everything. And that's a very rare person. Those are far and few between, people who actually live their lives, embody their life in the concept that God is sovereign over everything. And that's totally fine. We don't need to defend our maybe lack of faith in some issues, because we in this human life we're in a difficult spot where we're somewhere between the divine and the not so divine place. So it is a challenging premise to live truly into the idea of God being sovereign over everything. So we're not going to beat people up for that, but again, I do think that I'm suggesting today that that is a false narrative, the idea that Republican voters just didn't show up. Also, on the idea of um, why is it that increasingly it seems that our government is in the business of the government and not the people? Oftentimes, part of that is the idea that Republicans seem to always want to distance themselves from other Republicans, and this seems to play against us. And that was actually discussed on the last call. Why is that? We never see the Democrats distancing themselves from other Democrats. They all seem to hang together while Republicans seem to run in the other directions from each other. And I think that is again akin to the idea of the the reality of our situation and the God model, that somewhere along the spectrum of faith, oddly enough, faith is more akin to the doubting and not so sure. And the more anti-faith is the idea of being very sure, being self-assured, because our ways are not God's ways. So if you truly believe that, you will probably doubt your decisions and our choices and direction. But if you're pretty much if you move further and further away from the God model, you're going to be more assured that your ways are definitely the right ways. And I think we can kind of see that in the big picture of social cultural messaging right now, is that they are trying to prescribe a certain morality and code of conduct which they believe is correct, and that sounds right, but that really can't come from the top down. It really has to come from an indwelling of the spirit from the bottom up. So that's a nuance, and that's the explanation I'm working on about the question: why do Republicans distance themselves from other Republicans while Democrats do not? This is akin to the concept of Christian apologetics in the genre and literature and criticism of the Christian faith. That's the concept of a Christian apologetics, that we always have to speak about God and about Christianity and Christ and the model of that from a apologetic standpoint, from a point of humility and inadequacy, because we really cannot fully embody or express or tell someone about the message of Christ, because we're actually unworthy to do so. So, an interesting nuance to consider on these topics, that there's a philosophical difference driving the behavior of the two parties. And again, this is conservative coffee hour. It's not necessarily Republican or Democrat. It's the idea of what is the underlying message and value and morality driving these narratives. As simple as I can put it, is it about our ways or God's ways? One of our callers mentioned that in her hometown of Springfield, Illinois, during this last election cycle and most every other election cycle, she had plenty of Democrats knocking on her door, but she didn't have a single Republican candidate knocking on her door. So the takeaway from that is we could be that person. We could be that person knocking on the door of our neighbor or those people in our neighborhood. So the idea that we need to really look for the opportunities and see the red wave in this last election cycle, see what was accomplished, and take note of the fact that we will have change of leadership in the House of Representatives this January. And the idea that when we see the boat, we might not be perfect, might not be our first choice, but maybe we should get in that boat. And when we see the tether, maybe we should reach for that tether. Recently, I was asked, is everything going to turn out? Is it all gonna work out? And I said, I really don't want to be in the assurance business, but I really, without hesitation, said I can assure you that things will work out. We do know that all will be well, and God's ways are not our ways. And truth be known, I think in our heart of hearts, we do know that God is sovereign over everything. And for that, we can be truly thankful. If you would like to join us at Conservative Coffee Hour is every Saturday at 10 a.m. Central Time on Zoom. I will include my email in the description of this video. I'll be happy to send you an invitation. And I look forward to seeing you very, very soon.